You just said the magic words, well, look what you did. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid.
You'll get the best for so much less. You folks will flip the lid.
If it's new
All right. Anyone get that little jingle there? Yeah, we're talking about disruption. And I'm saddened by Toys R Us getting out of there, but it was time. It was time, unfortunately for the employees, though. But it's about disruption, right? And Toys R Us is a great example of an organization that wasn't agile enough, given where the consumer the consumer changes, the technological changes, et cetera. It reminds me of this quote, and we include this in the report from the late Andy Grove of Intel. And I think a lot of us need to keep this in our minds. And I think if I listen back to what Brené was sharing, what Andrew was sharing, and other speakers here, this is all about what are we doing to consistently relearn things that we believe we know, but maybe things are going to change, or what we know needs to adapt differently given the technology or given the demographic shifts that are taking place out there. And so, for those of you at last year's conference here, you'll remember this guy, Mark Parrish from Igloo, the CEO. And if you'll remember, he was sharing how purposefully at his organization, they created basically a put the company out of business committee. On a regular basis, at a very senior level, Mark gets together with his team and they talk about what is it that we would need to look like to actually put ourselves out of business today. And that's the very intentional disruption that we see really separating the high-performance organizations going forward. In fact, agility, I really think that agility, maybe it's going to become too much of a buzzword. I hope it doesn't. But it's going to be more of a best practice among high performers. I think the disruptive piece of are we intentionally disrupting ourselves, and are we looking to be able to disrupt the marketplace? That's the next practice that organizations need to be focusing on. And when we were talking with Donna Morris at Adobe Systems, and we asked her a question, how does Adobe react to disruption in the marketplace? She actually flipped the question back to us and said, well, we're actually disrupting ourselves. And she started talking about how they had built a new cloud business, which is driving the organization forward. It's the basis. Their disrupting of themselves is what is laying the foundation for the success of the organization going forward. So what are these organizations doing? Because as Kevin showed earlier, only 9% of the over 1,800 business professionals, and many of you, thank you, who took part in our survey, told us that you really perceive your organization's approach towards change as the opportunity to be the disruptor. And so clearly a massive disconnect. So Kevin referenced this. We have a great case study that features Liz and Marty and the team at T-Mobile about HR's role, and Liz really spelled out for us 8 key practices that they've laid out and they're following through with that are part of HR's role in the business disruption at T-Mobile. That's in that case study. But it's a piece of what we've laid out. We have for years put together and studied agility or research on agility. And it started, I'll just reflect, this is not when it started, but just a few years ago, and many of the organizations in our membership adopted a model we put forth that we call the 3 A's of agility: anticipate, adapt, and act. And this year's research, which I'll show in just a minute, the cover there, the whole foundation, the whole structure of that research is around anticipate, adapt, and act. And by the way, since I have the cover up of the, specifically the kayaker, I want to call out 5 people on the research team that just did an outstanding job. So I can't see you because of the lights, but Lori Likens, Eric Davis, Mark McGraw, Tom Stone, and Jay Jamrog. We were and Kevin Oakes played a significant role in this too. We were all a strong team in getting this research put together. It took a lot of effort. I just wanted to say thank you to all of them. We're very proud of this work, and I'll be referencing some of the key findings in about 30 seconds here. Actually, 3 seconds. Here we go. So this is what we really believe is the menu, the essential ingredients for an organization that is very agile. Again, the ability to anticipate, adapt, and act on change. And the act piece is around disrupting yourself and disrupting others. There are 6 core elements to that. And I'll quickly go through those now. But before we do that, in the spirit of Brené Brown, I'm another Star Wars geek, right? Obi-Wan, in episode 4, sensed a great disturbance in the Force. And that's when the planet Alderaan just exploded, right? And as Lori Likens referenced to me before, when we were going through this research, she said, wouldn't it have been great if Obi-Wan actually sensed before it happened and could have done something about it? And I said, yeah, you're exactly right. Well, what are these organizations doing to get a sense of what's happening before it happens, right? Because of the trends that are out there. So we're going to work on your Jedi Knight sensing powers right now. Because one of the key ingredients is the ability to sense disturbance. Now, in the research that we produced on the secret formula to agility, we found 6 talent practices of high agility organizations. One of those talent practices was rigorous environmental scanning. And this research clearly showed that as well. But what we found is the real difference maker for the organizations is not that they're conducting this rigorous environmental scanning. It's what the high performers are doing. They're actually sharing and discussing the data, the information, and trying to glean insights at a much lower level. It's not something relegated just at the EC level or the corporate level. It's down at the mid-level leader level as well as the frontline leader level. They're actually having conversations at least quarterly about this type of information. What type of information? Well, it could be trend data that you're getting from the World Economic Forum, right? It could be customer demographics. It could be information coming in from an HR business partner that's saying, hey, you've got to be tuned in. We've got to be tuned in to what I'm hearing out there in the field. And what does this mean to us? And in the report, we actually highlight what Disney is doing in their Consumer Products Interactive Media Group from an HR perspective, a slight change they've made to their weekly HR staff meetings to help them identify these low-level signals so they can get ahead of it. And then we also call out what Ford Motor Company is doing. And Ford has a great initiative that was spearheaded by their CEO, Jim Hackett. And we'll be publishing a blog real soon that actually gets into details of something they call Curious Minds. And it's a great way, and it's an example of what we saw out there from organizations about how you take that information outside and you bring it way down below, even to the first line, the frontline workers, okay? Oh, by the way, this quote right here was shared with us by the CEO of a Global 500 bank called ANZ, Australia and New Zealand Bank. 50,000 employees based in Australia. And when we were talking with Shane Elliott, he said, you know, Kevin, first off, when I got on the phone with him, he said, I'm blowing this place up. And he did use an expletive, right? So I won't. But I'm blowing this up. I'm blowing up bureaucracy. What he meant is we had to get speed into this organization. And what he was talking about was speed from sensing. This is his quote. The key is speed from sensing to insight. What are we gleaning from what we're sensing out there to action? And the real key around the action component is balancing that with your priorities, right, and your strategy. So you're not just going down any shiny object. Failing forward. We hear a lot about failing fast, which is fantastic. It's an agile concept that a lot of organizations ascribe to. But what we're seeing out there is a very iterative approach to innovation that allows for more calculated risk-taking. So one of the key ingredients we found in our research is that these organizations have got to just get rid of the culture of fear, the fear of failure. And organizations like Microsoft had to go from being, the smartest person in the room to someone who is very open to ideas and willing to accept new challenges, new thoughts, divergent perspectives. And in fact, we actually highlight one of the great stories I think that's out there about a leader that's really exemplifying and bringing forth or creating an environment in a culture prior to when Satya took over that was very internally competitive, very zero-sum game oriented. And where they launched a product. Anyone here familiar with a launch in 2016 of Tay, Thinking About You, an artificial intelligence chatterbot that they launched, and it was all designed out there to feed off the social information and be able to tweet back, have, almost like conversations in the social sphere. But some really smart people and some real jerks, actually, too, in the social sphere started tweeting very, very racially inappropriate, sexually inappropriate information targeted at Tay. Tay took that with the machine learning and AI and started tweeting out its own racially insensitive, sexually insensitive tweets. They killed that project in 16 hours after launching it. And Satya's response to that, and we saw this in Inc. magazine, was an email that said something like, "Please know that I'm supporting you, this team. Let's learn from this." It wasn't you failed, etc., but it was a learning moment. And that's the type of mindset, that's the type of approach that we're seeing that's really critical to driving agility. Our research with Rob Cross has been very, very telling. It's all about purposeful collaboration, very intentional. A couple things that stood out from that research that are incredibly important and really validated in our agility research, where project team members are intentionally assembled based upon the customer or business need at hand. So it's not necessarily, this is my A team, put them on this. It's much more around who's the customer, what's the demographic, what's the culture that customer base is in, or whatever it might be, who on the team best brings that perspective, background, those experiences, etc. Bringing a very diverse group together that's most relevant to the business issue and needs at hand, and allowing that team to really tackle that. And then what I also wanted to mention here as a next practice, one of the things that we see with this research is where these high-performance organizations are starting to tap into that next bastion of value. And that's beyond the human capital, it's the layer of social capital within their organizations. It's the social networks and the the silos that can be broken, the interdependencies that can be strengthened, the knowledge that can be shared and transferred through identifying and figuring out where do we need to make very purposeful connections, and it becomes the onus of the leaders to actually help people make those connections, establish those networks, etc. In the report, we give a great example of General Motors, and I just want to reference this really quick. They intentionally took a new leadership transformation program at their top 400 leaders, and it was all about establishing connections with them, very intentionally having people meet with people and working on work teams after that. And so they focused on connections first, not content. Content was important, but connections first. From that program, they can target 3 major business innovations that are driving the company forward. Okay? So the power of the network. Structure, a nimble structure is incredibly important. There's a lot of talk. There was a lot of news when IBM decided to co-locate its workers in North America. Our research found that only 8% of companies are actually looking to bring workers back to their home offices. And in fact, we didn't see a positive or a negative statistical correlation with either market performance or agility effectiveness by doing that. Where we saw very strong correlation to market performance and to agility effectiveness was breaking down these functional, traditional work teams and having cross-functional, cross-business unit, agile, self-directed teams. We also found that having more like agile methodology and concepts, scrums, iterative development, et cetera, was good. But a real key here was taking from what we found in our collaboration research with Rob Cross, where we found that the best collaborations are in organizations where they've actually assigned a formal or informal role to help facilitate the collaborations. And if you bring that, if you transfer that into agility, think about lean methodology if you're a manufacturer. At many organizations where they adopt lean, they actually assign a team whose job it is to work with those teams to ensure they're adopting lean standards, lean protocol, ways of working, and not falling back on the old way of working. They're doing the exact same thing. At IBM, they created a team called Accelerate. We call that out in the report. At ANZ Bank, they're doing the exact same thing to help make sure that those teams are working. So it's a very intentional, structured way to follow through with that. We talked to a Unilever and one of their top HR executives, and he was talking about how everything's about creating this borderless, fluid transfer of talent and knowledge across the ecosystem. And Lauren Heringa at Land O'Lakes had mentioned, and Ellen Shook had mentioned, it's about this ecosystem of talent, 100%. And in fact, we call that out in a big way. We really view this ecosystem of partnership as big, 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 but we also view it as a next practice that every organization's got to get their mind around. In fact, it's one of the next practices we call out in this research. How are you creating this network of trusted partners where you can borrow, share, rent talent? And in fact, within this research, we built this model that I believe will be very, very helpful to all of you. And what we're showing here is what we see as this ecosystem of partnership. And it is when we talk about an ecosystem of talent or talent fluidity, we're talking not just about people, we're talking about knowledge, right? And the information exchange, it's got to be borderless, it's got to be seamless. And as you can see here, this includes things like, yes, using gig workers where appropriate. And there's a place for that. P&G, we brought them into our Chief HR Officer board twice last year because of what they've done around on-demand talent. But they've managed it very smartly with a lot of governance around it, and it's paying off in a big way. Crowdsourcing, curating content, getting new ideas and innovation from a curated audience. We reference startups, what Unilever's doing with their Foundry, what Airbus is doing with their Biz Lab, in order to partner with startups where they no longer allow, like Unilever said, we don't want to become the internal bottleneck to innovation. So when our employees come forth with innovative ideas, but if we don't have capacity or capability, we farm it out to a startup, they come back to us and we're going to market. Or Airbus, they may buy that business. External talent marketplaces, swapping talent to build capability fast with trusted organizations. Internal talent marketplace, we highlight what Disney's doing with something they call gigs, which is a very unique take on an internal talent marketplace. And then, of course, you've got collaborative teams in here as well. So, the last thing that I wanted to highlight real quickly is this. It is clear to us that an agile organization requires agile leaders, and agile leaders are boundaryless. Now, Brené this morning said you've got to set up boundaries. What she was talking about is not what we're talking about. Boundaries to protect, what stays in, what stays out for you as an individual, 100%. What we're talking about here is these leaders are able to break through personal boundaries like fear of failure, fear of difference, fear of not being the person who knows every answer, cultural boundaries, being able to identify and mitigate bias or unconscious bias even in that regard too. Geographic, being able to manage without forget about proximity, being able to manage and use technology to whether have performance conversations or energize and motivate teams, right? And then organizational, that's really system boundaries. These are leaders that are thinking beyond the function, beyond the business unit, beyond the enterprise walls, and into the system. Are we establishing relationships with our customers? Do we understand the political landscape here and who those individuals are? And if I look into my business value chain, my supply chain, am I working well with our suppliers? Is there an opportunity to swap talent there too? So these are people who are looking boundaryless and able to do that. And what we put together in this research is an agility or an agile leader checklist. I am pointing to these right here because they're grouped in twos. The first one is the first two. All of these, by the way, all of these individually have at least a 0.5, I think a 0.56 correlation to agility effectiveness. Very, very, very strong. Some of them are like a 0.7. For you data geeks out there, this is like party time, right? And so all of these matter a lot. And I would encourage you to take this and ask yourself, how effective are you? How effective are your leaders when it comes to these 8 variables right here? And I just want to do a quick time check right here. Eric, do we have 5 minutes or do we not? We have 5 minutes? Here's what I want you to do. At your tables, or if there's only 3 of you, get some tables together. Talk about one of these 6 in the white and share an idea with each other right now. Let's get some fluidity of knowledge in here right now in networks. So you're on the clock, because I'm going to time you. Go. All right? Here we go. Three, 2, 1. Here we go. All right. Now, hold. Let's see. How many of you actually discussed one of those 6 areas up there? Hold up your hand real quick. Excellent, excellent. How many of you feel like you learned something from your conversation that actually was either new or insightful to you? Hold up your hand. Because if you don't, then you're telling your table mates that they really weren't all that interesting. All right, now, so here's the thing. These are the actions to take. We would really encourage you to read and share this report. We have presented this research, I think it's now to 6 of the CEOs and our members so far in just the last 2 months. We've been brought in by the CHROs to the CEOs. And we've got another one coming up in a couple of weeks here. This topic and these findings are incredibly relevant. And so please read, please share. For I4CP members, you can download this electronically via our website. Discuss the 3 A's with your organization. In the very back, we have recommendations, a conclusion and recommendation, where we surmise through bullet points, hey, to anticipate, this is really what we're talking about here. These are the 3 or 4 things. To adapt, these are the 3 or 4 things, et cetera. So it provides a very useful checklist and discussion item for you. For I4CP members, you can go online now. You can download the Tableau workbooks for free, as you know, Tableau readers. You can actually go into the data and you can, if you want, you can segment and find out if you're from a certain country. Hey, in this country, how many respondents and what were the responses? Or in this industry, I just want to filter on this industry. Or my organization, we correlate and write the research off of only employers of 1,000 employees or more. But if you happen to be an organization that's 500 to 1,000, you can filter on that and look at that if you want. Or if you're only at 50, if you're 50,000 employees and higher, you can filter on that and figure out what the responses are. And then lastly, I would really encourage you to think about having an I4CP thought leader meet with your HRLT and your CLT to go through this information. We've done it on numerous occasions. It is what we're finding is it is really forcing, it's forcing a dialogue around HR's role and influence and agility. And also, it even can broach into HR's, where does HR fit into the innovation equation at our organization, which sometimes, and unfortunately, is relegated only around product. And so, I would encourage you to act on that. You can work through your account manager to make sure you set those up. But I want to thank everyone for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful time reading our research because it is fun. Thank you.